Okay, we're going to talk about fractions and decimals and how they go hand in hand. So we are going to use base 10 blocks today to help us with this, and we are changing the value of this piece right here. Instead of 100, this now represents one whole. So we have our decimal here, and remember the decimal separates the whole numbers from the fractions and the numbers less than one whole. So because this piece, we know that our base 10 system is made up of groups of 10. We know that 10 of these will fit into our whole. So therefore, this is 1/10 of a whole. And that is why it is called the 10th place, because 10 of these will fit into the whole. Now, we have this piece that will fit 100 times into our whole. So this piece represents the 100th place. So we have, this is 1/10. The 10th place represents 1/10 of a whole, and the 100th place represents 100th of the whole. And this represents 1. So if we were going to write this number as a decimal, we would have one whole. We have 1/10 and 100th. So that would be 1 and 11/100ths, because this 10th, if we separate it into 100th pieces, we know that there are 10 in a 100th piece. So we could change this. If we were to break this apart, we know that that is equal to 10 of these. So now we have 11/100ths, which shows your 11/100ths here. Okay, so let's build another number here. If I have 2 wholes, and I'm going to drag down 4/10ths, and we'll say 300ths. All right, right down here you can see our decimal. This is written as 2 wholes, and we have 4 in the 10th place and 3 in the 100th place. We would read this number as 2 and 43/100ths, because this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 300ths. So we could write this as a fraction as well. So if we were going to write this as a fraction, we would write our whole number. We have 2 wholes, and we have 43/100ths. So we would write it like this as a fraction. Now, this is equivalent to the decimal representation as 2 and 43/100ths. Okay? All right, let's try another one. Let's say we have 1 whole and 300ths. We would write this as a decimal as 1. Since we don't have any tenths, we would put a 0 in the 10th place, and we have 300ths, 1 and 300ths. And we would write that as a fraction as 1 and 300ths. Okay, so in 4th grade, another thing that we need to know how to do with fractions and decimals is to be able to add them when we have denominators equivalent to tenths and hundredths. So let's look at an example here. If we were going to do 4/10ths plus 400ths, let's see what we would get. So I'm going to drag 4/10ths. There's 4/10ths, and we have 400ths. 1, 2, 3, 400ths. Okay, so if we were going to add these all together, as you can see, we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 4. And since these could be broken down into hundreds, that would leave us with 44/100ths. Okay, so a lot of confusion happens when you would just add 4 plus 4, but the reason we are not adding these as 4 plus 4, this is not 400ths. So we are having to change these into hundredths because these could be broken apart into hundredths. All right, let's try one more. All right, let's try 4/10ths plus 30/100ths. Okay, now what we could do here is we know we've got 4/10ths. Let's drag down 4/10ths. Now, instead of dragging 30/100ths, we could drag 10 of these to equal 30. So 10, 20, 30, because we know we could break these apart into hundredths, and that would give us 30 hundredths. So now, as you can see, we could write this as we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 hundredths. We could write it as 70 hundredths, or we have 7 tenths. So when we are writing our answer, we could either do 70 hundredths or 7 tenths. Those are equivalent, okay? Now, to write that as a decimal, we could write it as 7 tenths. We could also write it as 70 hundredths. And all of those answers would be correct. So one thing that we can do when we are looking at fractions, okay, we know that we are changing our tenths into hundredths. So if we know that 4 tenths is equivalent to 40 hundredths, then we can easily add 40 hundredths plus 30 hundredths and get our 70 hundredths. So those are some different strategies that you can use when you are adding and subtracting fractions with denominators of 10 and 100.